Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The report was sent to the Prime Minister for final confirmation. It is a long-standing agreement that the Prime Minister will endeavour to respond within 10 days. The Minister has indicated that there have been instances where further delay has crept in, but my Secretariat tell me that it is unprecedented that we should have had no response at all explaining why any further delay is required in this case. The report has to be laid before Parliament when it is sitting. If it is not laid before Parliament ceases to sit this evening, it will not be capable of being laid until the committee is reformed, and in 2017 that took nearly 6 months. How is it that the Prime Minister has claimed through the number 10 spokesman that there must be further delays for consultation about national security, and I ask this of the Minister, when the agencies themselves have indicated publicly this morning in response to journalistic inquiries that the publication will not prejudice the discharge of their functions? So for what purpose is the Prime Minister still considering it? It certainly can't be the risk to national security, as the agencies themselves have said there is none. Could he confirm that the Prime Minister does not have carte blanche to alter our reports or remove material from them, and if he wishes to exercise a veto over publication, he must give the committee a credible explanation as to why he is doing this? Can he also explain why number 10 spokesmen have insisted that no publication should take place because weeks of further interdepartmental consultations were needed, when I have to say to the Minister, this explanation was plainly bogus? Finally, can he explain why number 10 spokesman suggested parts of the report had been leaked by the committee, when it's plainly obvious to anybody who looks at the journalistic speculations that it has not? And would he now like to take an opportunity of withdrawing that particular slur which came from number 10?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to my right honourable and learned friend for his questions and the tone of those questions. I would simply reiterate points that I have made already in my speech. It is not unusual for the review of ISC reports to take some time. The average turnaround time is 6 weeks. The average response to the committee is anywhere between 3 or 4 weeks. And it is not as if, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has had not one or two other things to do during the last several weeks, notably obtaining a good deal for Britain in withdrawing from the European Union. So it's not unusual. It is not unusual that the turnaround time is what it is. The Prime Minister has very specific and particular responsibilities under the Justice and Security Act 2013 to be sure that any information that the ISC reports may contain is properly checked and, if appropriate, redacted. The Prime Minister takes that responsibility very seriously indeed, because the reports which issue from the ISC are important, they carry weight, and therefore they must be properly looked at, and that is what number 10 is doing. That is what the Prime Minister is doing by referring to his officials for advice, which is his right and responsibility to do. As to leaks, Mr. Speaker, well, we see quite a few of those, I suppose. We deplore them all, and I certainly wouldn't want anybody to believe what is in a leak, particularly if it appears on the front pages of certain newspapers, to be believable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and can I thank the Right Honourable and learned member for Beaconsfield for securing it and for all his efforts. I can only echo his words about the utterly unjustifiable, unprecedented and clearly politically motivated reasons for delaying publication of this report until after the election. This is not at the request of the intelligence agencies. There are no foreign powers we have to consult, which was the reason for the delay of the rendition report. This is nothing less than an attempt to suppress the truth from the public and from Parliament, and it is an affront to our democracy. So we are bound to ask, what is Downing Street so worried about? Why would they not welcome an official report into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 referendum, whether successful or otherwise? And I fear it is because they realise that this report will lead to other questions about the links between Russia and Brexit and with the current leadership of the Tory party, which risks derailing their election campaign. Questions about the relationship between the FSB-linked Sergei Nalibin and his, I quote, good friend, the current Prime Minister. Questions about the Prime Minister's chief aide, Dominic Cummings, his relationship with the Oxford academic Norman Stone, and the mysterious 3 years he spent in post-communist Russia, aged just 23, and the relationships he allegedly forged with individuals like Vladislav Surkov, the key figure behind Vladimir Putin's throne. And questions about the amount of money flowing into Conservative coffers from Russian emigres, about the sources of money that paid for the Brexit campaign, and about the dubious activities of Conservative friends of Russia. And if the Minister of State is going to dismiss all this as conspiracy theories or smears and say it has nothing to do with the delay of this report, then I say back to him, prove it. Yes. Publish this report and let us see for ourselves. Otherwise, there is only one question. What have you got to hide?
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I'm obliged to the Right Honourable Lady for giving, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to the Right Honourable Lady for giving us a rundown of her interest in smears and conspiracy theories. She wonders where Professor Roger Stone was in the 1980s. I rather wonder where the Leader of the Opposition was in the 1980s, and for that matter the 1990s, the 2000s, and quite recently. It's rather rich for her to suggest that somehow the Conservative Party and this government is linked to Russian disinformation, given the way that her own party leadership has acted and the responsibility her own party leadership has had down the years for being hand in hand with their Russian friends. In respect to her question about publication, the government has a responsibility, the Prime Minister has a responsibility to properly look at the report. He has a responsibility under the Justice and Security Act 2013 so to do, and that is what he is doing. The turnaround time for this report is not unusual. The response time to the committee is not unusual. The CT attack report took some time to turn around. The detainee report took some time to turn around. So I understand why the Right Honourable Lady may wish, for party political purposes in this febrile time as the House of Commons is about to dissolve, I understand why she may wish to make the points that she has. But they are entirely refutable. I believe personally they are reprehensible, and I wish that she would withdraw the imputation about the good name of the Conservative Party in this government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must declare an interest. I am a member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, and I absolutely support what our chairman has said. This is a question of principle as much as anything else. I'm not going into what the details of the report are about. I think there have been a lot of foxes let loose by the media. But I really have this question to put to the Minister, and I feel sorry for him in that he's been landed with having to answer this rather than perhaps somebody from the Cabinet Office. The question is, as far as the committee is concerned, this report has been cleared by the intelligence and security agencies, it's been cleared by the Cabinet Office, and the civil servants and officials saw no reason whatsoever why it should not have been published. Would the Minister therefore tell the House, and I don't want to hear all that repetition again, why it is that the Prime Minister is not going to allow this report to be released and published in this Parliament?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to, before I answer his question, say farewell to my right honourable friend who has been a steadfast member of this House and a doughty champion of defence and security issues, both here and on the ISC. He asks a very straightforward question. I will give him the straightforward answer. The Prime Minister has a responsibility under the 2013 Act to properly and carefully adjudicate upon the report that is placed before him. That is what he is doing, and it takes some time.
Stephen Gittins.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield? He and I disagree over a wide range of issues, but his fairness and his scrupulousness in holding his own government to account and others to account like me is a credit to this entire House. Now, the Russian government's greatest victims are its own people, with human rights abuses, human rights activists, democracy activists and opposition groups and minorities targeted. I spent a number of years working in the former Soviet Union, and we visited there as a Foreign Affairs Committee as well, and I pay tribute to the bravery of those who campaign for fairness, the rule of law and democracy in that country. Now, surely, Mr. Speaker, the greatest riposte that we have and the greatest support that we can give those campaigners is to show that democracy, openness and transparency for the United Kingdom should be something to look up to. And I fear in this case it is not. Now, I hope the Minister is embarrassed by what he's just heard from the members of this committee. Their questions were damning, and I'm not surprised he didn't answer it. Given the threat that Russia poses to elections, can he tell us, his government have wanted an election for months, why is this not a priority? Brexit's taught us that this is a government that likes to hide unhelpful reports. Lots of them. Prove me wrong, publish the report.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm obliged to the honourable gentleman for his question. This government is prepared to be robust and transparent with respect to Russia. Look at the way we carefully collated, assessed, scrutinised and presented the evidence of the Kremlin's involvement in the attack on Salisbury and Amesbury. Look at the way in which we built an international alliance that responded to that threat. We are perfectly prepared to be robust with respect to Russia and be transparent too. He asked about evidence of involvement, the involvement of Russia in our elections. There is no evidence to suggest there has been any successful Russian involvement in the British electoral cycle. And so I would ask him to be careful, to be thoughtful, to be considerate at this febrile time as the House dissolves before the general election. Allow the Prime Minister his right and his duty to assess what is in the report, and then we can produce a report in good time.
Yes. David Davis.
When the Minister talked about the ISC, he referred to the JSA 2013, the latest act that just crystallised, frankly, the practical approach to the running of the Security Committee in the years since 1994, when it was created by the Secret Intelligence Service Act. That act created a balanced arrangement with the committee, balancing national security with the right of scrutiny, balancing redaction and the right of the Prime Minister to approve the report before it is released. But it rested on balance. Both sides, the House and the government treating the other side fairly. And that's what's missing here. And if I may say to the Minister, by not releasing a report, all he does is create a vacuum for the paranoid fantasies we've heard from the opposition benches to fill.
Absolutely right.
Well done.
Well, as ever, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He'll appreciate that I can't be responsible for the paranoid fantasies of those opposite. All I can say is that the report was received by the government on the 17th of October. It is not unusual for such reports to take 6 weeks to turn around, anywhere between 3 and 4 weeks for a response from the government to be forthcoming. Given the circumstances, given all the other things which are going on at the moment, I am not surprised that the report is taking a little time to turn around. That does not mean to say in any way it is being suppressed or withheld. It means to say it is being properly considered.
Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, and congratulations. As a Labour member of the Intelligence and Security Committee, can I support my right honourable friend, the chair of the committee, in his concerns today? The security services have cleared our report. The Cabinet Office has cleared our report. We have made recommendations to the Prime Minister. So my question to the Minister is this. Since receiving the report, has the Prime Minister read it? Has he submitted any redactions? I don't need to know what they are. Has he read it and has he submitted redactions? And if not, why doesn't he publish today?
I'm obliged again, Mr. Speaker, to the honourable gentleman for his question. A report such as this, a sensitive report, a report which is 50 pages long, requires careful consideration. It was submitted, as I said, on the 17th of October. It is being reviewed by all the relevant senior officials within government and at number 10. The committee will be informed of that process, and when the Prime Minister has concluded that the report is publishable, then he will publish it.
Steve Baker.
Entitled not to be bullied into accelerating the release of important national security reports, and wouldn't it be the case that it would be a dangerous precedent to establish that the committee could come to the House and bully the government into releasing what is a very important and sensitive report?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that government is being bullied. Certainly, we are not prepared to be bullied. What we want to do is to make sure that this report is given proper consideration, careful consideration. Any further changes or questions that may be made to it or of it can be addressed, and then a properly balanced report can be published.
I cannot miss. Come on in. Can you manage? Sit down and ask the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it, Mr. Speaker? I think all of us in this House would probably recognise from our email inbox that maybe one of the challenges our current politics faces is that people watch too much Netflix, and therefore they are convinced that there are many conspiracies. But does the Minister recognise, in an environment when, as members of the committee have said, many foxes have been set loose, when we've seen reports about Sergei Navalny, about Dominic Cummings' security clearance, about Alexander Terenko's friendship with the Prime Minister, about the use of the Leica mobile officers, and we hear all the security agencies say they are happy to see this report, which the government has had since March, published, when we hear cross-party support across this House for this to be published, when we heard Earl Howe in the House of Lords yesterday say it is the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister alone who needs to publish it, that the best way to kill the conspiracy theories is just to put it out in the open. Former Prime Ministers told us that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Why has this Prime Minister closed the blinds?
Mr. Speaker, the best way to avoid conspiracy theories is for people not to peddle them. I think the Honourable Lady just made a valiant effort in so doing. I've explained why it is taking some time to consider the report. We will consider it carefully. We will make sure it is a robust report and it will be published in due course.
Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response. I certainly would welcome debate on covert and malign foreign interference, any attempts on our side, but also why Seamus Milne always seems to peddle the Kremlin's line, and the links between senior people around the leader of the Labour Party and pro-Russian groups in Ukraine and elsewhere. I think there'll be a lot of interesting debate there. My question to the Minister is a broader one. Would the Minister agree that the best way to minimise the chances of malign and covert interference in our electoral system is through the introduction of a Foreign Agents Registration Act, a FARA? The US introduced one against covert Nazi influence in 1938. The Australians produced a Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme just last year. I will be working with the Henry Jackson Society to produce a potential template bill for FARA. Would the Minister be interested in discussing it with me, should we both be re-elected in December?
Very good. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm always interested to hear the ideas and read the reports of my honourable friend. I would certainly be interested to see the work that parliamentary draftsmen may have to undertake in defining what a foreign agent is. They tend to keep themselves rather quiet, it seems to me, so identifying them may be a challenge. But of course, I'm always interested to see what he has to offer. And if we are both re-elected, and I wish him well in that enterprise, then of course on the other side we will talk.
And welcome, Mr. Speaker. Why, given the gaps and inaccuracies in his account of the 3 years he spent in Russia, was Dominic Cummings inexplicably granted the highest developed vetting status and yet is routinely denied access to secret intelligence? And what damage is this unprecedented arrangement doing to our vital security arrangements with our Five Eyes partners?
Mr. Speaker, I am not going to comment on individual public servants. All I would say is that the right honourable gentleman asking the question he did appears to be less a member of Parliament and more a walk-on member of a show like 24.
Richard Benyon.
In my time on the committee, I have built up a healthy respect for the way we do parliamentary scrutiny of our secret intelligence agencies. And indeed, other parliaments from around the world come and look and see how we do this. And what I'd say to my right honourable friend is this. There's much in this report that I would love to be able to talk about here and to address some of the more eccentric conspiracy theories we've heard peddled here. But really, when it comes down to this, we have a highly respected system for parliamentary oversight, which is trusted across this House. In the absence of the publishing of this report, does he not feel that we have created the climate into which has allowed some quite bizarre conspiracy theories to be peddled, and it would be much better to publish what has been written in the way that the committee have produced?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I also bid farewell to my right honourable friend, who again has been a fine member of Parliament for Newbury in the last 18 years. We will miss him, and we'll miss his intelligence, his care and his consideration. He wonders whether by acting in a different way we would reduce the propensity toward conspiracy theories. I suspect the answer is no. I think that those conspiracy theories would find their way into the light thanks to some members opposite, whatever. All I can say is to repeat what I've already said to my right honourable friend. This report requires careful consideration. It requires the Prime Minister to do his duty by the JSA Act, and that is what he will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and many congratulations from these benches on your election. Look, there are serious questions to be answered here, and it is perfectly legitimate, I say to members on that side of the House, for members on this side of the House to be asking the questions that we are asking. Our job is to scrutinise what the government is doing. Clearly, there are serious questions to be answered in relation to the role of Mr. Dominic Cummings, one of the most senior officials in government. Maybe the answers will allay those concerns, but we deserve to hear those answers. And I ask the Minister, and I have to say, the response today he has given is utterly shameful. If the shoe were on the other foot, and he was at that opposition dispatch box, is he denying that he would be asking for publication of the report as we are?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the job of members of Parliament is to scrutinise legislation reports, not to fantasise about them, which is what I think all too many members opposite are doing. Mr. Speaker, the government has a duty to properly scrutinise the report presented to it on the 17th of October by the ISC. The Prime Minister has a duty to ask searching questions about that report and satisfy himself that there is nothing in it which breaches our security privileges and the national security of the country. When that job is done, then the report will be published and not before.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, is it not the case there's no conspiracy? There's no cover-up. This is just a manifestation of a considered bureaucratic process, and that's what it is, Mr. Speaker. But can I point the Minister of State to some comments that the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield has made over the last 24 hours? And Mr. Speaker, courtesy of the House, I did inform his office that I'd be making these comments. To the Minister, to the media, he said, quote, "I can think of no good reason why the IC report has not been published," end quote. Now, whilst the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield is very learned, the fact that he doesn't know a reason doesn't necessarily mean there is not a reason. And I wonder whether the Minister of State could confirm that.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his comments. My right honourable and learned friend has every right to ask questions and make comments in the media. That's his duty as a Member of Parliament and his right as the Chairman of the ISC. But it is the duty of the Prime Minister with his officials to properly consider the report. That is what he is doing. And until that job is properly done, it should not be published, and the turnaround for publication is not unusual.
Sir George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations. The Minister says that the process that he's going through at the moment is not unusual, and the Secretariat of the ISC say it's unprecedented. Yep. Both can't be right. Now, will he take into account the fact that the Secretariat of the ISC, the Cabinet Office, the whole civil service, the security agencies have all said there is no problem of national security about this? And surely he must conclude that if it is not a matter of national security, then the reason why it isn't being published is political. Yep. Will he just take my advice, publish or be damned?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the timelines for the submission of this report, relative to the timelines of submissions of previous reports, speak for themselves. The CT attack report took something like 6 weeks to turn around, with 4 weeks from the submission of the report to a response from the government. The detainees report took about 3 weeks from the point of submission to the point of response. So these timelines are not unusual, and therefore I don't recognise the comments, although I'm sure they're made in absolutely good faith. I don't recognise the comments made by the ISC Secretariat. The timelines speak for themselves.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister is absolutely right that scrutiny does dispel fantasy. And today this is one of those moments where I feel that scrutiny would be entirely appropriate to dispel that fantasy. There can be few members of this House, from the Right Honourable and Learned Member for Beaconsfield, or indeed the Right Honourable Member for Broadlands, or indeed many other members at the ISC, who are all personally chosen by the Prime Minister for their judgment, for their character and their wisdom. Would it not be appropriate at this moment, when the country is focused on the most important democratic event we will hold, certainly for a number of years, that the information needed to judge its legitimacy is put before the House, people can see the fantasy that some are claiming, and this can all go away.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do not question the probity of those that have compiled this report, and I certainly recognise the wisdom of my honourable friend, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I therefore think it's unfortunate that some in the House have chosen to question the probity of government officials and the wisdom of the Prime Minister in properly scrutinising an important report laid before him. That report went to number 10, as I said, on the 17th of October. It will be properly scrutinised, but that set of considerations has not been concluded yet.
Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also add my congratulations to you as well? A very simple question to the Minister, actually. Clearly, there is unease of the delay why this report has not been published. Can I ask the Minister to confirm that the report is not being withheld for the interest of the Conservative Party? It's simple as that. Can you confirm that?
Minister.
No, it's not.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations on your election as well from me. The Minister sent by the Prime Minister so that he can avoid scrutiny himself says that the time the report has been with the government isn't unusual. But will you acknowledge that the report itself is unusual because it's about interference in elections and we're just about to embark on a general election? So if the government continues to block it after the security services have cleared it, it can only be either because it doesn't take the security committee seriously or because it's got something to hide. And can you just clarify which of those two it is?
Well, that was one of those questions, wasn't it, Mr. Speaker? There we go again with a little light fantasising. The committee has produced a serious report. The Right Honourable Lady from a sedentary position accuses me of sneering. I think that's pretty rich, I have to say, but I will press on as politely as I possibly can to the Honourable Lady for her question. It is not unusual for time to be taken to consider serious reports. This is a serious report and it should be considered in a timely way. In the meantime, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that there is no evidence to suggest that Russia or the Kremlin has successfully engaged in interference in our electoral processes. If she believes that there are, then please bring that information forward, but we have seen none.
British Chairman.
Can I be helpful to the Minister? I say that I listened to your speech yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and you will know this is at the really heart of our proceedings, isn't it? This is a all-party report. The government isn't publishing it. It should publish it, and there's all-party support for it to be published. And we only a few minutes ago, really, had the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs here who could have been here to make a statement. This is a very important issue. I want to fight this election on health, on employment, on jobs, and all those important things. If we don't stop this now, this will run and run, almost like a Watergate thing, throughout the campaign. So please, publish it now and let's get on with the general election on the real issues.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Let's fight this election on the real issues, on migration issues, on health, on education, on our stance on Brexit. Get out there and do it, and let's stop stirring the pot on this non-issue.
Congratulations on your speakership. Does the Minister accept and understand that the report has been cleared? Failure to publish today will mean, as a number of members across the House have said, that almost every day for the next 5 weeks this will permeate the campaign. It can and should be avoided by publication today.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect that the campaign, like most campaigns, will focus on domestic issues. I'm sure he will be fighting very hard in his constituency on matters which concern his constituents. I suspect that this won't be one of them.
Mr. Speaker, and congratulations on your election. 2 or 3 times I've noticed the Minister has said there's been no successful penetration into the British electoral system.
That's their formula.
Does that imply then that there's been unsuccessful penetration into the electoral system? And is that one of the reasons why the report is not being published?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member who I think may have spoken for the last time in this chamber, and we wish him well in whatever he does next. Maybe like Tony Benn, he's going to retire from the House of Commons and go into real politics. We shall see. He asks the question, are there examples of unsuccessful interference in British politics? Well, it is clear from the way that the Kremlin has behaved. We've seen examples overseas of attempts at electoral interference, at attempts of fake news and disinformation, most recently in Georgia. What I would say is that we have robust systems in place in this country to defend ourselves against such attacks, and that's why I say that such attacks have not been successful.
Lucas.
We know that there was overseas interference in the US presidential election, and the DCMS Select Committee, in its disinformation report last year, called for an independent inquiry based on evidence that we produced to the government. Now, that was rejected, that request to the government. And isn't the problem that this decision to withhold this report is part of a course of conduct by this government to refuse to look at whether there has been the level of interference that many in the country believe there has?
Exactly. Well said.
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, who I think also may be leaving the Commons very soon, I wish him well with his future, asks, I think, a reasonable question, because disinformation tactics do continue to evolve, and therefore we must always be on our guard. The Online Harms White Paper, which the government produced, commits us to introducing a duty of care on online companies to tackle a wide range of online harms, and they include limiting the spread of disinformation. With respect to the election in the United States, of course, lots of comments have been made, suggestions and allegations have been heard. I'm not going to comment upon the US election. All I can say is I think the US have as a robust system as we do.
Luciana Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome you to your new post. Further to that last question, I'm not in the business of peddling conspiracy theories, but I do look at credible sources, and I was disturbed by the release of the US Senate Intelligence Committee's report last month, which did find Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, which makes the release of this report all the more important, all the more relevant, and all the more imperative as we embark on this democratic process of an election in our country. Can the Minister confirm today, has the Prime Minister read the report?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady is quite right to draw attention to the actions of the Kremlin in states abroad. I said that we have evidence around the world of activity which is malign and malicious. I believe that we here in the United Kingdom have a robust set of systems in place to defend ourselves. We will look closely at the report that the Right Honourable and Learned Member for Beaconsfield and his committee have submitted to the government. It is going through the number 10 process, and at the end of that rigorous review process we will see the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations on your election. We've heard from several members of the IC this afternoon, including 3 sat behind the Minister. All have highlighted that every security agency required has signed off this report, as has the Cabinet Office. The unprecedented delay is due to the Prime Minister. Is this because this Prime Minister is acting in the unprecedented fashion of subjugating national security to personal political interest, and his loyalty to Dominic Cummings, a man already found to be in contempt of Parliament?
Minister.
The short answer, Mr. Speaker, is no. The report has to go through a proper and rigorous process of scrutiny. It was submitted to the government on the 17th of October. The time being taken to scrutinise it is not unusual. To say it is unprecedented is not accurate. Other reports, other Sensitive reports, complicated reports have taken between 4 and 6 weeks to turn around. This important, sensitive report is no different.
Last but certainly not least, the safest seat in the country, Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and many congratulations to you. The Prime Minister is required, the committee chair has reminded us, in the instance that he can't respond within 10 days, to provide an explanation for that failure. He hasn't done so. He hasn't provided an explanation, and that, we understand, is the feature of this, which is unprecedented. Why is it that the Prime Minister has not complied with the requirement placed upon him?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is because there is no requirement. The Memorandum of Understanding with the committee for the government is clear about the rules. There's no set timeline for a response, and there's no set deadline in the governing legislation. The Prime Minister has a duty under the 2013 Act to look carefully and considerately at such reports. That is what number 10 is doing. That is what the Prime Minister will do. And when that work is completed, the report will be published.
This is it.